And if the Prime Minister means what he said last night about listening to Alberta and Saskatchewan, the clearest way he could do so would be to unequivocally commit this new government to the completion of the pipeline that the federal government owns. I also did raise with the Prime Minister during our call earlier today my hope that we could work together in pursuing the at least partial sale of that pipeline. I think it would be a big boost for its potential completion if there was at least some level of Aboriginal financial participation in the pipeline. We've extended, as you know, through the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, the possibility to facilitate some of that. So the bottom line is this, with a lot of issues on the plate here and a lot of anger and frustration in Alberta, I want people to keep their eye on the prize, focused on our most important economic imperative, which is the completion of that pipeline.
Sorry, just follow up on that
Sure.
point. So when you mentioned it with the Prime Minister about, come out and say you're in favour of the pipeline, what did you say to that?
It was a brief conversation. We didn't get into a detailed conversation about that.
Premier, the dynamics changed quite a bit. Now you've got a Prime Minister that needs help to govern. So he needs something and you need something from him. Will you be changing your stance with him in any way? I mean, politics is at some level a little bit horse trading. Is there something that you might be able to offer him to advance his?
Well, Dean, when we first spoke the day after Alberta's April election, I indicated to the Prime Minister then and 3 days later at our in-person meeting in his Ottawa office that I want to find a way to work together. And I've always said, it's no secret that I have been opposed to most of his policies because I think they hurt Alberta. But at the same time, I'm a Democrat and I respect any elected government, and I will seek to work with any elected government. And that includes, for example, I said to him in April that we would be willing to be flexible on the price of our Tier Levy, the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Levy, that we would be willing to be flexible on, for example, the emissions cap on the oil sands, if we could exempt oil sands projects from the disastrous new Bill C-69. And I said generally, we're prepared to try to find a way forward with this federal government. That I reiterated that today. Our approach is not to be dogmatic. Our approach is to defend our vital economic interests, and that may require some a give and take with the federal government. I would also point out to the Prime Minister that on many of the issues I've spoken about, we have the support of all or most of the provinces. 9 of 10 opposed to Bill C-69. Several provinces opposed to the application of the carbon tax. 9 of 10 provinces in favor of energy and resource corridors, including oil and gas pipelines. So, together with trying to have taken a constructive role with Ottawa, we've also tried to build a pan-Canadian coalition that reflects our interests.
Carbon tax, though, I mean, it's important to the Prime Minister symbolically. Is there any flexibility from you on that issue?
Well, I guess I would say the flexibility is in our implementation of the levy on major emitters, which will capture over half of the emissions from the Alberta economy. Justin Trudeau and I disagree about the utility of punishing seniors for heating their homes and people driving to work. I just do not think that is effective environmental policy, and Albertans spoke very clearly on that last April. I would, on this point, Dean, I would say like the carbon, the levy on major emitters through the Tier Levy is a very significant piece, and we'll be setting that at $30, which is where the federal government wants us to be in 2020. And we are actually working very closely with the Federal Department of the Environment on the technical application of the Tier Levy to industrial emitters. So there actually is a fair degree of cooperation there. But we will not see eye to eye when it comes to punishing people for heating their homes. I would remind you that Premier Pallister and the Manitoba government they were actually committed to a retail carbon tax. They didn't agree on the price point, and they couldn't find any flexibility from the Trudeau government, which was unfortunate.
Premier, I want to ask you about the equalization formula, because you brought that up again. Why didn't you lobby any of the federal leaders in this election to make that part of their campaign pledge to rewrite the Constitution or rework that equalization formula?
Well, we did. I mean, this was part of our platform, and we've expressed this consistently. I've raised it with the Prime Minister before, and the position of Alberta is well known on this. We believe the equalization formula is fundamentally unfair. But let me point something out here. First of all, of the $20 billion net annual contribution that Albertans make to the rest of the Federation through their federal taxes, only about $3 billion of that is through equalization. That's important. You know why? In part because it's insulting to us that we have to subsidize provinces that choose not to develop their own resources with the resources that we develop. We think that's a perverse incentive for other provinces not to develop their resources.
Let's go
And we think it's fundamentally unfair that it keeps going up and up. There's no ceiling. There is a ceiling on the fiscal stabilization program. There's all sorts of ways in which equalization is unfair. But it's the entire $20 billion of net transfers out of this province that, as I say, we don't object. We don't object to sharing some of our wealth. What we object to is Ottawa and some provincial governments expecting us to pay those bills without allowing us to develop the wealth to do so. So all we're trying to do is connect the two. You want us to pay the freight in the Federation? Fine. Then help us to pay the bills by selling our oil in global markets.
Let's go to the phones. Can we wait just 1 second? We'll go to the phones. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Our first question comes from Rick Bell from Calgary Sun. Your line is open.
Good afternoon, Premier. Just a couple quick questions, one and a supplementary. Number one, why should Trudeau listen to Alberta? To get reelected, he doesn't need Alberta. His father was able to stay in power without Alberta, and history's shown us there's little likelihood the Liberals will ever win a lot of seats in Alberta. And he's got a lot of other things on his plate, dealing with the Bloc Québécois and the NDP. Why should Trudeau even listen to anything the Alberta government has to say?
For two reasons, Rick. Firstly, because if the frustration and alienation in Alberta continues to mount, it will pose a very serious challenge to national unity. Secondly, because Alberta plays a hugely oversized role in national prosperity and the finances of the federal government. And so if he wants to strengthen national unity and the Canadian economy, then he needs to listen to the provinces that produce a disproportionate amount of the wealth in the Federation. Yesterday, Albertans spoke with a louder voice than they have ever done in federal electoral history. In fact, I believe, I haven't been able to confirm this 100%, but to the best of my knowledge, last night was the single largest mandate for one federal party in a province since 1867. That's a pretty powerful statement. That was a very diverse spectrum of Albertans who sent a powerful message last night. And many of them are saying they don't feel at home in their own country, which I think is tragic. And so, as I said to Prime Minister Trudeau when we first met in May of this year in his office, I said, Prime Minister, the first obligation of anybody in your position is to strengthen national unity. But it's actually being undermined in the province that has contributed more than any other in our modern economic history. So that's why, Rick, because if you care about unity and prosperity, you should care about how Alberta's doing.
Your follow-up, Rick?
But when you talk about a serious challenge to national unity, and I agree with you, a lot of Albertans are vein-popping furious today, and many of them are talking about separatism, and many are talking about a nation within a nation and all of that stuff. We've heard that before. We heard that in the reign of this particular Prime Minister's father. Why should they even react to the possibility of a serious challenge to national unity when it's not really, at least outwardly, as serious a challenge as when Quebec challenged national unity and they had a large separatist movement and a separatist party and a referendum and they almost left. I mean, why should they take that seriously? Why should they not think that Alberta is just the boy who cried wolf? And that there's lots of anger now, there's fury, people are apoplectic in many cases, but in the end,
Sure.
it won't matter a lot.
Well, Rick, it matters a whole lot to this province that is essential to national prosperity. when I go and meet the top financial leaders of the country on Bay Street, they are desperately interested in what is happening to Alberta's economy, because our ability to generate returns on pensions, on people's life savings, federal revenues, all of these things depend in a very large measure on what happens here in this province. So I would hope that no Prime Minister is as cynical as you suggest and becomes disinterested in a huge and growing share of the population feeling alienated from the country. I would hope that's not the case. But I would equally hope that any federal government cares that you know, this is the goose that laid the golden egg in modern Canadian economic history. And this needs some tending. This relationship needs some good faith from Ottawa. And if it doesn't get that, I fear that the alienation is going to go in a very problematic direction. But Rick, this is also why we have built into our platform commitments some real leverage points, including forcing a serious debate on the Constitution that I don't think Justin Trudeau wants to have, which is a full, open referendum on equalization 2 years from now if we can't get fairness, if we don't get a pipeline built. And so we built things like that in as leverage. And Rick, I announced earlier today that our government will be launching a panel made up of eminent Albertans to consult more broadly on other ideas of how to get a fair deal in the Federation. We are going to force our fight for a fair deal onto the national agenda, come hell or high water.
It's actually Michelle's turn.
Well, Premier, I want to ask you more about that panel. What will be the purpose of that panel when they come up with a report? What do you intend for this to achieve?
Well, two things. First of all, an opportunity for Albertans to express themselves and their view of their role in the Federation, particularly in the light of this brutal election when our province was being targeted for attacks by federal parties. And secondly, to canvass every idea that's out there about how more effectively to get a fair deal for Alberta within Canada. So there are a whole lot of ideas that have been floated about constitutional amendments, non-constitutional approaches, a greater assertion of provincial jurisdiction. Many of these ideas go all the way back to, for example, ideas that Peter Lougheed floated in the late 1970s and since then. So the mandate we will give to this expert panel will be to look at all of those ideas and say what would be the most effective ways to assert fairness for Alberta in the Federation, and to listen to Albertans in doing so.
Do you anticipate this panel holding public hearings?
Yes.
Oh,
They definitely have public hearings, and I want to get this going as quickly as possible. I've already spoken to a couple of very prominent Albertans. They're just checking with their families and employers to see if they can secure the time this fall to spend on the road talking to Albertans.
When do you expect to announce? They may
Hopefully next week.
Next week? Okay.
What kind of professions are you looking at for folks on that panel?
I would just put it this way, eminent people whose names you will recognize.
Tyler?
So you spoke a second ago about this frustration going to dark places, and the Prime Minister has a responsibility. What is your responsibility to keep it from going to a dark place?
Well, my responsibility is to offer constructive alternatives, and that's what we're seeking to do. We did this in our platform in the Fair Deal for Alberta section, which includes a number of constructive ideas. I think the solution to frustration that's expressing itself in separatist sentiment is positive ideas about reforming the Federation for a fair deal for Alberta. And that's what we're focused on doing. That's what we have been doing.
So say I'm a separatist sitting in front of you. Give me your 30-second pitch on why Alberta should stay in the Federation.
Well, first of all, it's an emotional one, because I really believe at heart most Albertans are patriots. We've had a higher number of young Albertans enroll in our military at times of crisis, and we are proud of what we've done together as Canadians. Secondly, I would say that we should not let Justin Trudeau and his policies make us feel unwelcome in our own country. And thirdly, I would say we have allies across Canada. We have provincial governments who have got our back on a number of these issues, including a fair deal for our resource sector and our oil and gas workers. So we're not isolated. We're not alone. People shouldn't draw that conclusion from last night. We have, as I say, 9 to 10 provincial governments that say they're for oil and gas pipeline corridors across the country. They're against Bill C-69. Those 3 points. First of all, an emotional attachment to this country. Secondly, we shouldn't let Justin Trudeau make us feel unwelcome. Thirdly, we have allies. And fourthly, my view is this. Landlocking ourselves through separation is not a solution to the problem of a campaign to landlock Alberta. The Green Left has been leading a campaign to landlock our energy. Why would we give them what they want by landlocking Alberta within North America as a jurisdiction that has no argument for access to our coasts, or for that matter, a jurisdiction that would fall out of NAFTA? So I just think from an Alberta, it doesn't make, for me, it doesn't accord to my own emotional attachment. I'm not going to let Trudeau push me out of my country. We've got allies across the country, and we're not going to get 1 inch closer to a pipeline by closing in on ourselves as a landlocked jurisdiction.
Dean, what do the Conservatives do right in this election? What do they do wrong?
That was longer than 30 seconds. I apologize.
Sorry, the Scheer Conservatives, you work with them, you stump for them. What do they do right in this campaign? What do they do wrong? And what do they have to do to win government the next time around?
Well, I think they did a lot that was right. They picked up 26 seats. They won the popular vote. They won seats in every region of the country. And I think Andrew performed commendably both before and during this election under unbelievably vicious attacks. I think, there's always a challenge for a new opposition leader, especially at the federal level, to become known. And now he's had a chance, I think, to demonstrate that he's capable and even-tempered and likable. And now he has a chance to build on the progress that he has made. I think, if you look at last night's result, it's clear that there was a particular challenge in the seats around the Metro Toronto area. So if I were to give any advice, it's fairly obvious advice. It's to focus on working hard in those areas, particularly amongst the new Canadian communities with whom I spent so much time over 10 or 15 years in federal politics. I truly believe those new Canadians are naturally conservative in their values and aspirations, their belief in economic opportunity, low taxes, strong families, law and order, and immigration reform as well as strong immigration policies that ensure fairness in the system. I'm not sure that the federal Conservatives always got that message out, and they just need to redouble their effort to do so. But listen, that was, let's put this in perspective. Mr. Trudeau is forming a government with the lowest level of popular vote of any government majority-minority in Canadian history since 1867. Mr. Scheer won the popular vote. That in itself is an important achievement, and it's certainly a base upon which to build.
Politics can be a very cruel business, though. Some are calling for, say, Andrew Scheer shouldn't get a second chance. Conservatives need a new leader. What do you think?
I think that would be a big mistake. I think parties that do that are very short-sighted. I think Andrew has earned the trust of Canadian Conservatives and certainly the right to contest the next election. He's grown as a leader, as a man, under enormous pressure. That is something of great value when it comes to running in a brutal federal election environment. And so I can just tell you this, Andrew Scheer is a good friend of mine, and he has my unequivocal support in staying on as Conservative leader, and I believe that most Alberta Conservatives feel that way.
Let's go back to the phones. Hang on, Kieran.
Well, I was never going to do it full-time, obviously. I've got a full-time job here, but I did pitch in when they requested, and certainly shared the views of Albertans. And what can I say? Last night, 1.5 million Albertans voted for the federal Conservatives, electing 33 of 34 MPs, nearly 70% of the vote. I think that demonstrates that what I have been saying about the views of Albertans bears out as having I mean, 70% is just about as close as you get to unanimity in a first-past-the-post electoral system. That is a massive majority, and I think it confirms that Albertans are behind what our government has been saying about the need for fairness in the Federation.
Let's go back to the phones. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Don Braid of the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Premier, when your panel sits out, and I think I heard you say that there would be public hearings, I just wonder how you keep the lid on, or even if you want to. I'm just watching the comments go by, the chats go by on your Twitter feed, and it's running pretty hot. You haven't even started yet. I'm just wondering how you handle the prospect of these becoming very emotional, almost pro-separatist rallies. Do you plan to just invite the public, or do you
absolutely
experts, or how are you going to do this?
Yes, Don, these will be wide open public town halls, and you know what? For exactly that reason. There's two approaches that leaders can take in an environment like this in Alberta today. One would be to dismiss and ridicule the sentiment of frustration that is palpable and refuse to listen to those people. That is the worst mistake possible. That would just, I think, create even more frustration. The other alternative, Don, is to actually listen to people and respect what they have to say. And I think that is the much wiser approach. And so that's exactly why we'll be appointing this panel, because I sense, Don, let me be blunt about this. There are a lot of people who might be characterized as the Laurentian elites or certain opinion elites who don't take that sentiment seriously, but they should. And so the hearings that we will hold will be an opportunity for people to speak out. And I do expect to hear a lot of frustration. And people have a bloody right to be frustrated in this province, Don. They have every right. There are people who have lost their homes, lost their jobs, their families that have broken up. We've seen, as the University of Calgary confirmed last month, a spike in suicides in Alberta in the past 4 years. This has had very real-life consequences on people. And we must give those frustrated Albertans an opportunity to speak their minds. Don, I have heard from people who I never expected who would have characterized themselves before as political moderates, talking to me in the last 24 hours about separation. Now, I don't know how many of those people are just finding that language as a way to blow off steam and articulate their frustration. But we darn well better get to the bottom of it and listen to people with respect. And that's what we intend to do.
Do you have a follow-up, Don?
Thanks, that's good.
Okay, Laurent?
Sur le sentiment de la demande d'indépendance, pourquoi est-ce qu'à votre avis, ce n'est pas une bonne idée?
Tout d'abord, j'ai un attachement au niveau des émotions au Canada. Ma famille a servi dans la force armée canadienne depuis les générations. Deuxièmement, je ne permets pas, M. Trudeau, de me pousser hors de notre pays. Et je crois que le Canada est beaucoup plus grand et beaucoup plus important qu'un seul chef politique. Troisièmement, nous avons pas mal des alliés politiques parmi les autres gouvernements provinciaux, y compris sur plusieurs enjeux, le gouvernement du Québec. Par exemple, le Québec est à notre côté contre l'imposition de taxes sur le carbone du fédéral. Et le Québec nous appuie contre le projet de loi C-69 du fédéral et la plupart des autres provinces. Et finalement, je dirais que ça fait aucun sens pour moi de nous fermer comme une petite juridiction sans accès aux côtes, sans accès aux marchés domestiques ou internationaux. Hors du Canada, nous perdrons accès au marché américain avec l'ALENA, par exemple. Si le problème est que nous ne pouvons pas obtenir accès aux côtes pour les oléoducs, comment est-ce que nous obtiendrons l'accès aux côtes hors du Canada? Pour moi, ça ne fait aucun sens au plan logique.
Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire, vous, dans votre position? pour l'unité nationale? Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire pour
Ben,
l'unité
nous,
nationale?
nous proposons les alternatives, ça veut dire une réforme de la fédération pour justice pour l'Alberta au sein de la fédération, avec une série de propos, y compris celles que nous avons déposées dans notre plateforme électorale. Et également, je vais nommer un groupe des personnages importants albertains à faire les consultations avec le grand public pour développer les autres idées, mieux défendre les intérêts stratégiques de notre province au sein du Canada.
Mr. Kenney, is there a concern on your end that Alberta may get forgotten in, say, infrastructure funding and that sort of thing because we won't have any representation, we may not have any representation in cabinet?
No. Those programs, I mean, have to operate on an equal per capita basis. It's not about, I hope Canada never becomes about some sort of like banana republic divide the spoils, kind of system. So whatever programs but what we will be demanding, I got to say, as part of our fight for a fair deal is, to the greatest extent possible, moving from federal cash transfers to tax point transfers for areas that are within provincial jurisdiction. Because we think that's a smarter and fairer way of allocating federal support for policy areas that are within provincial jurisdiction, and that's something where we are aligned with Quebec, for example.
I was wondering, sir, just your relationship with Mr. Trudeau. You've been very outspoken, of course, before the campaign and the whole Notley-Trudeau alliance and fighting and trying to defeat Mr. Trudeau. Now you have to work with him. Is it still your intention to try and defeat him? Because we're in a minority government situation. They don't last very long, a year and a half, 2 years. Is it your thinking that it won't last very long?
I don't know. I don't think any federal party is going to be in a rush for a second election, Graham. But on your main question, look, in politics, you have vigorous disagreements, and then you try to get things done. Mr. Singh has spent the last 18 months trying to defeat Justin Trudeau, but now he'll be presumably working with them in this Parliament and then trying to defeat him in the next election. So, this is democratic politics where you make your case, you respect the results, and then you try to serve the public as best you can. And my job is to serve the public of Alberta, who clearly agreed with me that Mr. Trudeau and his policies were damaging this province. I think yesterday was a massive confirmation of the critique that I have been making about this federal administration for the past 3 years. It was a huge confirmation of that. So I feel validated by what Alberta voters said with their ballots yesterday. Graham, it looks to me like about 2/3 of the provincial NDP vote migrated to the federal Conservatives yesterday. They went from 32% provincial election to 11% yesterday. This is a big coalition that I think agreed with my take on this federal government.
Then how does that work in terms of confederation? Like they feel isolated. You mentioned you had other allies, but in terms of the actual vote yesterday, the Liberals were still in power.
Well, that is why I've been very purposefully trying to build a pan-Canadian coalition of like-minded provinces. I've been attacked by the NDP for spending a bit of time outside the province, but there's a reason why. I've been to virtually every provincial capital. There's a reason why I've spent a lot of time trying to. We hosted that Stampede Premiers meeting. We've done other things to identify common interests that were expressed at the Western Premiers Conference at the Council of the Federation, at these court challenges where we're supporting one another. So I would say to Albertans, we are not isolated. To the contrary, on most of these issues that matter to us, we have most of the provincial governments on side, and that is meaningful. And I'll go a step further, Graham, and say that, I'm a bit of a student of history, and I observed very closely, in retrospect, because I was just a kid back in the day, how Peter Lougheed dealt with a different, very problematic Trudeau administration on many similar issues. And one way was precisely for Alberta to play its historic role as a leader amongst the provinces. I think we're doing that again, and I'll be on the phone throughout the balance of the day with a number of my provincial premier colleagues on exactly that.
And that letter will be made public.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to actually just flip Graham's question on its head slightly for one. Sorry if I see checking your watch. The event in Strathcona, the small, island of orange in the sea of blue, in some ways it's a microcosm reverse of Alberta and the rest of the country. What do you say to those voters and those people who might kind of feel like maybe they're the ones who are hemmed in?
Well, as I understand it, even the NDP, newly elected NDP MLA in Edmonton Strathcona ran on a pro-pipeline platform. So I think you've got 34 for 34 Alberta MPs who agree that Trans Mountain should be built, who are opposed to C-69. I wish her luck in her federal caucus because I don't think she's going to find any sympathetic ears there based on the intemperate views of Jagmeet Singh on these questions. So I'm not sure. I think if those people were really, the voters in Edmonton Strathcona felt dramatically differently than Albertans on these issues, they would have elected a Green MP as opposed to a New Democrat who says that they support pipelines. And with that, it's been half an hour and I've got to chair a cabinet meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Here, if you want to comment from the NDP caucus.